The comments and statements made within the show are the opinions of the commentators and their guests, have not been evaluated by the FDA, and are in no way attempt to diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. The contents of the show are not to be construed as medical advice. If you have a health condition or health concern, please contact a licensed, qualified healthcare practitioner.
Hi everyone, I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom, and this is a Supplement Super Sleuth.
That'll be me, and the Herbal Storyteller.
And that definitely would be me. And together, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain of the natural products industry.
We'll be sharing naturals in the news, dispelling lots of myths, interviewing key players in the industry, and highlighting our favorite herbs and supplements.
So with that, let's pull back that curtain and see what's there.
Hey there. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hey, I am pretty good, Nan. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm really glad because spring is on the way. Really happy about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's spring. And so we thought we'd do a special episode on ticks and tick-borne illnesses today.
It is that time,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. And oddly enough, it's just as things start to warm up, when the temperature's between 40 and 50 degrees, that's when they start crawling around and climbing on things, and they are looking for blood. Modern day vampires for sure, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah. You got some news for
Yeah,
us? Naturals in the news?
Yeah, well, we were talking about it
Yeah.
earlier, remember? That
Definitely.
this is, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit to start you off, and then I'll let you take off from there. So from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases comes the following data on tick-borne, illness. Lyme disease is spreading, which is not great news. And this is from way back in 2018.
Wow.
So in 2018, over 300,000 cases of reported Lyme disease were registered in the U.S. Okay, so that's in 2018, over 300,000.
Wow.
And this represents about 0.1% of the total U.S. population at that time. So as a comparison, let's see, in 2018, heart disease.
Yeah.
Look, just take the number one cause of death in the United States. In 2018, heart disease caused 365,745 deaths.
Wow, so that's close.
Almost the same number of heart disease deaths as there were new associated Lyme disease cases.
Wow.
Now, and remember, cardiovascular disease that's the number one cause of death in the country. What's really kind of crazy is the fact that Lyme disease numbers are increasing every year because the ticks are actually reproducing almost unhampered by the colder weather. Even though you guys have had some really, seriously cold weather, because you always
lots
do.
of snow, yeah, we do.
And lots of snow.
In Massachusetts, yeah.
They're basically the ticks are now active all year round. In 2020, this will blow your mind. It kind of scares me, and part of the reason that they're much more active is a lot of their natural predators are on decline.
Oh, right.
So things like possums and quail and free-ranging chickens, who absolutely love to eat ticks, they're not as prevalent. Especially possums. Possums just are like vacuum cleaners for ticks. So this is the shocking thing that I thought was like I couldn't even wrap my head around it. In 2020, there was a moose that was shot in Vermont, and they found 90,000. That's 90,000 ticks on its body.
No.
So there was literally an explosion of ticks in Vermont that's causing the deer and the moose population to really decline because they're literally getting all of the blood sucked out of them.
By the ticks,
More
right?
than half.
Ugh.
Yeah. More than half of the moose calves in Vermont die of blood loss because of ticks during the winter.
During the winter.
And,
So a lot of people think
yeah.
that ticks go away and you don't have them in the winter, but this is during the winter.
Yep, and even in Providence, New Jersey, or Providence, Rhode Island. Excuse me, sorry, New Jersey. An article from December in 2021. So this is just a few months ago.
Yeah.
It was talking about how climate change will bring more pests and diseases to New England, and it's there was an article in MedPage that talked about why tick-borne illnesses are increasing in the U.S. and the fact that it's now considered to be a 365-day
And
problem.
it's across the nation. I mean, I do live in the epicenter of ticks and Lyme disease, Ipswich, Massachusetts, the Cape, and then, of course, Lyme, Connecticut, and all along the eastern seaboard. But I do know that the Rocky Mountains have issues with ticks, like Rocky Mountain spotted fever up there, and California has their share
Hmm.
of tick explosion, just the amount of ticks in general, and then a very great percentage of those would be carrying, diseases, of course, because that's what they are. Ticks are really interesting because they are not technically an insect. They're an arachnid. They have 8 legs, so they're in the same family as the spider. So,
Hmm.
a lot of people who spend time outside who are sort of in this like, well, it's a spider. Well, it's a tick. It's, that's the way it is. They're not paying attention. Ticks and spiders can also carry diseases that are really difficult, like Leptospira, which is, the Leptospira is a type of disease that comes from spiders that is a spirochete. A spirochete is the kind of bacteria that Borrelia is. It's in the family of syphilis. So spirochetes are spiral, and they're extremely intelligent. So
Yeah,
carriers,
think of them like little corkscrews that go through the
exactly, and
body.
that's what they look like, and they're extremely sophisticated in their ability to survive. Carriers for ticks are not limited to deer and moose. There's other vectors, which include field mice, squirrels, rodents, birds. So a lot of people don't even think about the birds. They think the ticks are going to be around their ankles, and they're falling from the sky basically because of the birds in the tree. So that absolutely happens. And that's how they'll get on, tucked on people's ears, lobes, or around the base of their neck. Um, in addition to infections with Borrelia, multiple tick-borne infections with other bacteria and viruses may be present. So focusing on Lyme disease alone may not be sufficient regarding ticks in general because they carry so many diseases. Ticks and the bacteria that cause Lyme disease, Borrelia, or the family of Borrelia, or spirochetes. The one that we talk about the most that's related to Lyme disease that we know is called Borrelia burgdorferi. Um, they've developed very sophisticated strategies to survive and then thrive. So it's not just the tick that we have to worry about. Now we have to worry about the bacteria and the viruses in the tick. But the ticks alone, which are the major vector of spreading these kinds of, really troublesome health issues, are just on a boom. They really are on a boom. Suffice it to say, some of the strategies look like this. 2017, from the Journal of European Cytokine News, Volume 28, Number 2, a widely studied protein on the surface of Borrelia, which is the bacteria, and it's a spirochete in the family, in the species of spirochetes, is surface protein lipoprotein E. Lipoprotein E. This protein is of interest because it contributes to immune evasion and persistence in the host, which is mediated through our different parts of our immune system. So that's not the only evasion tactics. Okay, so now there's strategies even by the ticks themselves. So there's the bacteria that have strategies, and then the ticks have strategies. So SALP, SALP 15, on the other hand, is a protein derived from tick saliva. And this is where things get really interesting. That's involved in inhibiting CD4 T cell activation. So the tick crawls on you and it latches on, and then these enzymes in their saliva disarm your local immunity. So the result is your immune system is not going to work because the saliva is disarming your ability to fight
Right.
off.
Think of it like a burglar that's broken into your home by disabling your
Right,
alarm system,
right.
and you don't even know he's there.
And they have another enzyme called SALP, SALP 25D, that produces that production of reactive. So it shares homology with glutathione peroxidase. And we talked about glutathione in a past episode.
Yeah.
It reduces the production of your reactive oxygen species, which allows extended feeding time for the tick, since now your ability to heal the wound has been greatly impaired. So they don't have one strategy. The ticks have multiple strategies, from latching on to hampering your immune system, from also hampering your ability to heal a wound. And then the bacteria have strategies of survival. So it just, for me, I think awareness is really important. I see a lot of people who, have had their standard of care with after their tick bites, and they don't get better. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of question about that. But the
Well, and it works for their pets as well. I mean, if they let their dogs out, for instance,
right.
or the cats are outside cats, and then they come in and they have ticks, the ticks can drop off and actually be in their home.
Oh, that's happened to me with my dogs. I'll
Yeah.
find a little tick crawling on me, and I'll think, where did one of the dogs is laying on top of me, and I'm patting him, and then there's a tick, and it's like, oh. So you have to really pay attention this time of year. And there's so much recent research. I think, Tom, you found some really interesting.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say they're looking at that activity of the tick saliva that you were mentioning, because one of the things that it does is it deactivates the inflammatory process right around the local wound, and that inflammatory process, when it's going off, is like an alarm system
Right.
that's telling the body, hey, something is attacking us, something is wrong. And that saliva, the protein in that saliva, that's what SALP stands for, is saliva protein. Basically, that protein deactivates the immune system and also deactivates what are called chemokines. And chemokines, that they allow things to come through our cells and so on, so that our immune cells can get where they need to in order to take care of whatever the threat is. And so now they're looking at that particular tick saliva protein and realizing that, hey, we could use this to we can
Harness
figure
it,
out
right?
how to make it,
Right.
yeah, and turn it into an anti-inflammatory product that can help with arthritis and asthma and maybe even things like multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, it's very interesting how researchers will take something in nature. Of course, we do this so often. We'll take chemicals from plants, chemicals from insects. Insects are very interesting. In traditional Chinese herbalism, sometimes insects are used, and it's very effective. But for me, this is just the time to kind of ring the bell, make sure you really have your head about you when you go outside. Ticks are, they're really interesting. So they'll climb up a blade of grass, or they'll get on a twig, and they stick their hands out. Their little, not hands. They're I said hands because my hand. they stick
Right.
their 8 legs in the air, and they reach, and they have this sticky stuff on their, well, we'll call them feet, okay, and they're like these they're like little barbs that come out of their legs, and they literally will just grab onto the fabric, or onto the like your dog, onto the animal. So they're made to survive. Like cockroaches, they would survive.
Exactly.
A meteor. They just survived a meteor hitting the Earth, nuclear blast. They are incredibly equipped to survive. And then the bacteria and viruses that they hold in their stomach, which of course, when they latch on and they're sucking your blood, the contents of their stomach is spilling into your body. I know it sounds awful. It sounds a little like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and it is.
It is.
It really is. And, after the last couple of years with COVID and awareness about infectious agents, this is a good time for all of us to have our home kits, have our strategies to protect our children, our pets, ourselves. and really be aware of how these infectious agents kind of move around through vectors, right? Through the vectors. And vectors are the tick, the animals that carry the ticks, and that kind of thing. And your surroundings too.
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah, and you know what's fascinating to me is that like you were mentioning, there are multiple different saliva proteins
Yes.
that the ticks release, and each one of those saliva proteins is sort of disabling a different action of our immune system. So they really have they've really evolved
Yes.
to the point where, they know how to get what they want, and the bacteria that resides within them knows how to get what it
Yes.
wants. So,
Yes.
it's a kind of a release the Kraken kind of a thing.
Right, exactly. Okay.
So I understand we're going to have a really special guest that might help us with some of this. Is that right, Nan?
Yes, we are. Um, we are definitely going to have a very special guest today. And we have some wonderful questions set up for Dr. Arthur Gertler. We're very honored to have him on as a special guest. Dr. Gertler is a board certified gastroenterologist and internist who utilizes natural holistic methods of treating illness. So he is an integrative medical physician, and he's here in Massachusetts. This often this type of practice that is we're seeing more and more integrative physicians allows effective management of disorders and thought to be otherwise untreatable by addressing underlying causes. An individual approach incorporates numerous holistic therapies, both oral, IV, ozone, energy instruments, detoxification, diet. Lyme disease treatment is emphasized in Dr. Gertler's practice with more than 15 years' experience, maintaining the most contemporaneous and effective protocols as a Lyme literate physician. So Dr. Gertler practices holistic medicine at the Darcy Wellness Clinic in Natick, Mass, and we are very, very happy to have him today.
It must be time for our guest.
All right, it is time for Naturals in the Know. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Arthur Gertler. He's board certified gastroenterologist and internist who utilizes natural and holistic methods for treating all types of illnesses. This approach often allows very effective management of disorders that are thought to be otherwise untreatable by addressing underlying causes. An individualized approach by Dr. Gertler incorporates numerous holistic therapies: oral, IV, ozone, energy instruments, detoxification, and diet. Lyme disease treatment is emphasized in his practice with 15 years experience, maintaining the most contemporaneous and effective protocols as a Lyme literate physician. Dr. Gertler practices holistic medicine at the Darcy Wellness Clinic in Natick, Mass, and I am so honored to have him on our podcast today. I've known Dr. Gertler for, I think it's about 8-9 years now, and he is remarkable in his approach and the kindest human I've ever met. So, Dr. Gertler, welcome to our show today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. So, as an integrative physician, what percentage of your practice today is dedicated to Lyme disease? And do you believe in that concept of chronic Lyme?
Oh, yes. When I first became educated in treating chronic Lyme disease, I spoke to several Lyme literate practitioners in the area, and they all told me 90% of their practice was Lyme disease.
Wow.
As soon as they became known about treating Lyme, and same thing with my practice. It's very endemic. Many people have the disease, don't realize it because it's silent. And it's probably one of the most common infections in the country after colds, flu, and sore throat. but it's under-recognized and under-treated. We think everybody in New England should be screened periodically for Lyme disease with the blood tests.
Wow, that's
Uh,
great.
Studies have been done at Harvard 20, 30 years ago showing that many of the chronic neurologic degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, MS, ALS, scleroderma, chronic fatigue, lupus, uh, a high percentage of those, 70, 80% of those are due to Lyme disease, not the only cause.
Wow.
So it's really, at least 40 or 50% of chronic Lyme disease is silent.
Wow.
Nobody knows about it. These are defined in medical studies. So it's really a very big endemic problem.
Wow. So typically when a new patient comes to you, do you feel that they often express that they've been orphaned or ignored, and that's why they're in your office, is that they've been struggling and they haven't been heard by their general practitioner?
Oh, I'm sure you experience the same thing, Nancy.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Almost every single patient says, I've seen 12 or 15 general doctors, specialists. They don't know what it is. They tell me I'm crazy. They send me to psychiatrists. And as a matter of fact, I had a nurse that worked in a psychiatric hospital that developed chronic Lyme disease, and she told me in no uncertain terms that 60% of the patients in the psych hospital were there because of Lyme disease.
That's
And
incredible.
we
Yeah.
know this is true.
Wow. So it really is very interesting to me because there is this ongoing kind of ignoring behavior going on about Lyme. I mean, not just here on the Eastern Seaboard, but in California, it's really bad. Colorado, it's really bad. Texas, they have the Lone Star tick in Texas. And, it is starting to be everywhere. When I was in China, studying in China, it was on the news every day in China.
Really? Wow.
Every single day, there was something on the news about ticks and Lyme disease. Every day, I was stunned. And if I had spoken Mandarin, I probably would understand more. Of course, they had subtext for English-speaking people, but I was aghast at how bad it was in China. So it's not just here in the U.S., it is all across the globe.
As a matter of fact, an allegory to that statement, the German Lyme clinic, which is the largest one in Europe, came here several years ago to join the ILADS conference. And I had dinner with them and spoke to them at great length. And then I called the chief and got a consult from him. And their governments pay for all the holistic methods that they use to treat Lyme. The government says there are 85 million Germans and they get 1 million cases a year, the government says, of Lyme disease, and they treat something like 7,000 cases a year, 70% of which come from other countries. They freely admit they're doing a good job. France is supposed to be doing, the government, an in-depth study of Lyme disease.
That is remarkable. That it is wonderful to hear that governments are starting to take that on and really support their people who are chronically ill with Lyme disease.
rather than sending them to a
Well, the
psych
thing
ward.
is that many people have relatives that get Alzheimer's, MS, and they all have to be screened for Lyme disease
Yes.
because it's not the only cause of those things, but it's a good part of it, and it can be halted with
Yes. Yes.
adequate treatment.
Yes, absolutely. Now, during this past time of COVID, did you experience fewer or more cases of Lyme coming in to see you? And are you expecting an upswing of Lyme now that people are getting back outside again and being more social? Do you expect to see more people in your practice?
Well, absolutely. You read the papers. You must work in my office. That's exactly what we experienced, and many other practitioners too. I work at a clinic that has a lot of acupuncturists, and they experience the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be seeing a patient
Yeah.
in a few days for the first time. And this is typical of Lyme disease. She had some deaths in her family. Her husband was recently diagnosed as a fatal type of cancer. She's middle-aged. She's been on disability for 8 or 10 years because of Lyme, and they think she's getting her disability cut off by the government unless she can prove that she needs it again. And she's panicked because she has no other form of income. And so many patients have told me, I've been in bed for 3 months, I lost my job, I went on welfare, my husband divorced me because I can't walk around and do things. And this is a common thing. Now, the other thing I discovered, and I can't scientifically verify this, but I would say 80 to 90% of my patients are women. Now,
Really?
is it because they get worse disease or they're more apt to go to doctors? I think it's because they get sicker. It's very,
yeah.
very rare that I see. I don't know what your experience is, but
Well,
I
I
don't.
have a 50-50 because a lot of men who work, in landscaping and tree work have been referred into my practice. And so I have a toss up. I have a kind of a 50-50 mix, but I will agree with you that my women clients are definitely more ill than the men, and the men seem to resolve a little bit quicker. So there must be some neurohormone dysregulation that goes on that really affects, women more egregiously, I think. Yeah, I
And the
agree.
other funny thing is, a friend of mine who passed away, a practitioner, became holistic in California in the desert. His wife got Lyme disease. They live in the desert in California, an hour and a half from LA. His daughter got Lyme disease and she lived with them. How do you get Lyme disease in the desert if it's supposed to be in moist, marshy areas? And she went to one of the big shots in Lyme, Dr. Rawls. Now he's in Arizona.
Right,
Arizona is only desert,
right.
yet he sees tons of Lyme disease.
Yes.
And I was at a conference where one of the supplement companies was doing research on Lyme disease, and they told me they found infected Lyme ticks on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Nobody lives there. And
That's right. Nobody lives there.
you can't live there. There's nothing available to grow. It's
Right,
dry. It's beautiful, but they found ticks there. Now, we know that the Lyme disease is found in every continent in the world,
right,
and it's
right.
recognized by many other countries.
So Art, Tom wants to ask you a question. Do you mind? I'm gonna let him ask a question he was dying to ask, so.
Yeah, it's okay. I was just as happy to let Art
Oh,
go
I
because he
get it.
knows so
He
much
knows
about
so
limes.
much. Yeah.
Art, what I wanted to know is, so is there a resolution to this, or are people really justified in thinking, oh my God, there's nothing I can do. I have Lyme, and the medical establishment won't even acknowledge that I have Lyme. What can I do?
You know something? That question that was just posed is so common. People have had 15 years of Lyme. I've had it since birth. I got it from my mother. I tell them the truth. I say, look, why do you think I'm here? Do you think I'm here because I can't help you? I don't know of a single patient that followed our directions, that was compliant, that didn't get almost 90, 100% better.
Yeah.
The big problem is the natural methods of treatment we have are very, very good, and they often become asymptomatic in 4 or 5 weeks, 2 months, and then they never come back. They think they're cured, but they've made it silent, and then they haven't eradicated it completely, and 2
Right.
years later they get sick and it flares again.
And they have a
Yes,
flare, right?
you're the one that taught me the expression, once Lyme, always Lyme. That's
Yes,
true.
it
But
is true.
if you're willing to spend the money, and that's a problem, a lot of people don't have the money because
That's
these
right.
methods are not approved. They're not paid for by insurance. But the other problem is every Lyme practitioner does something a little different. All
That's
the
true.
Lyme clinics, I mean, Germany does something different. I do something, you do
Yeah,
this and that.
yeah,
And it's not that they don't work, they all work, but
yeah.
it's a very, very big discipline in and of itself. You're
It is.
constantly learning.
What do you think it might cost a patient who has chronic Lyme to use alternative methods to try and regain some stability in their health? Like on average, what would a patient pay out of pocket to find some normalcy, if you will?
Well, it varies so much according to where they've been. I've had patients tell me they've spent 20, 50, $100,000 and they still haven't been cured. I have reasonable costs. I see them once at the beginning for a consultation fee. I spend as much as 2 hours with them.
Yeah.
I see them maybe twice again in the next 6 months, and it doesn't cost that much. But again, you go to these big clinics and you do a lot of different things, and everybody, so it can really mount up. But I would tell you that the average patient I see has seen 10 or 15 different Western medical specialists. They've seen other holistic ones, and then they finally come to you. If they knew where to go at the beginning, it wouldn't cost that much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of it is they spend money on hunting and pecking, trying to find someone who has a protocol that's worked and that's worked over and over and over again. You definitely do. I think your patients really leave very happy, very well. It's really remarkable the work that you're doing, Dr. Gertler. You are really a very caring physician, and we're so lucky to have you in our area here in Massachusetts. We need to clone you.
Well, I have to tell you something. I had chronic Lyme disease myself, and the clinic that I work on, half the practitioners there have had Lyme disease. Yeah. So there's a personal interest also, and
Sure.
several of my friends, and it's heartbreaking when you see young people messing up their lives totally, going on disability, and nobody can help them.
Exactly. How prevalent are practitioners who are like you across the country, who can successfully work on the chronically ill after being diagnosed with Lyme disease? I mean, I think this is a small handful, although, I'm sort of in my little corner over here, but you have quite a touchstone with a lot of these practitioners. Would you say there's more available today than there were 10 years ago? Are people really starting to move towards towards working with people who are chronically Lyme ill?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, I fully agree with that. There are more and more. But the problem is, still, everybody does something different because there's no official training or agreement with the protocols. But yes, it's getting more and more recognized. I have to tell you this, though. Once you leave, even though New England is a hotbed of Lyme, many of the big clinics that are very successful in treating it are way outside New England. Like, I know a big holistic clinic outside in Irvine, California.
Right.
With all these instruments, we've done a study together.
Yeah.
Florida.
Seattle, Washington, I think yeah.
Because holistic isn't very popular in New England.
That's true. we're a bit of an anomaly over here, aren't we?
There's a female practitioner. She's either a chiropractor or a naturopath in Maine.
Yes.
Very,
yes,
very popular.
she's excellent.
Paula
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And but she might be one of 3 practitioners in the whole state.
Right.
With indigenous Lyme. And I have to tell you, I once went on a Charles River cleanup. We were right on the edge of the river cleaning up garbage, totally indigenous tick area. My wife and I were the only ones that knew to use tick spray to protect themselves. And that's another thing.
Right,
you
awareness.
You can almost eliminate it if you use the right tick spray.
Agreed.
The way you're supposed to.
Absolutely. There are a lot of things that one can do. And you have the whole gamut of prevention, care, long-term care, telling people that there are flares, and when you have a flare, come back. We're here for you. I mean, you are just remarkable with your patients, and especially teaching them about awareness. And that's really the most important part of this, is it's time for Lyme disease to come out of the closet in the United States, and really people who have been working with it. I mean, I have been working with it for 30 years as an herbalist and a homeopath. And and I had Lyme disease myself, and once Lyme, always Lyme.
You had Lyme disease, right?
Yeah, at age 30, which sort of really brought me deep into how to work with it and how to manage it and how to have an ongoing healing program. And when a flare happens, what do you do? And not to panic, not to get upset, and really just breathe through it and do what you need to do to get yourself back to normal. So, yeah.
Well, you put it so succinctly, and I must admit you helped me with my chronic Lyme.
Oh, thanks.
Without you, I wouldn't be healthy. And you opened my eyes. Your ability to use different herbs is remarkable
Thank
because
you.
not everybody can be a trained herbalist like you. And wherever you turn to talk to Lyme literate practitioners, you find a different protocol.
It's true.
And they all work well, but
They do.
that's the problem. I mean, and the vaccine that was developed years ago
I'm glad you said
didn't
this.
work at all. It produced so many side effects like
Right.
Lyme disease, chronic neuropathy, brain. So they haven't been able to develop another
And they
one.
haven't been able to develop a vaccine since the release of that. It was really an abysmal failure, unfortunately, right? The vaccine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
I see one of the problems is ignored by all the it's not taught in medical school or training. It's ignored by Western medicine. So they say, well, they don't know all the statistics and they don't live here and see the cases that we do. If they did, I'm sure they'd have a cure overnight.
They certainly would. Dr. Gertler, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us on our podcast today, and we wish you really good health so you can continue your crusade and helping patients who struggle with chronic Lyme. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day today.
Thank you. You too. To everybody out there, be well.
He is really, really an amazing man.
That was an amazing conversation.
I just adore him. He and I, will refer into each other's practices, and when we have questions, we call each other. He's been a huge source and support for me,
You've known him for years, right?
Somewhere around 9, maybe 10 years, maybe 8. I have to look at the date that we were first introduced, but he's the kindest person too. So I just wanted to add a few things, for people who are watching this podcast and who are really kind of now their interest is perked and they really want to do some things. The first is bookworm that I am, a book. So this is the book. This is the primer. This is the definitive text on Lyme disease, aspects of Lyme borreliosis. Dr. Bergdorfer and Dr. Weber wrote this book, and it's heavy. It's scientific. It's medical.
Right, yes.
But for any of those people who have a penchant for that level, this is a treasure trove of the tick, which is the mode of transportation for the bacteria,
the vector.
Right? Yeah. And the bacteria itself. And there's some things that Dr. Gertler was talking about that I wanted to share because, there's a lot of people don't really understand that you could have silent Lyme if you have arthritis. It could be this underlying kind of condition that you have no idea you have, especially if you live and have grew up, lived, and were very outdoorsy in epicenters, areas where there's a lot of ticks. Lots of times we'll see great disfigurement in the hands, the knuckles, the joints of the hands with people who have chronic or silent Lyme. It's also known as relapsing fever. And in fact, Tom and I were talking about this yesterday when we were getting ready for this podcast. Relapsing fever has been around since we knew about syphilis because they're sister diseases. They're sister bacteria. The bacteria that causes syphilis and the bacteria that cause Lyme borreliosis are all in the class of what's called spirochetes. So they're spiral bacteria, and they're extremely resistant. You can push them into what's called a silent phase, but once you have it, they're permanent hitchhikers. So that's something to keep in mind. So in Bergdorfer's book on page 97, I want to share this with you. And Tom and I were talking about this crazy last night when we were setting up for the show. There is considerable evidence that patients undergo a latent phase of the disease. These patients lack clinical signs and symptoms but have elevated antibody titers, usually of the IgG type, immunoglobulin G type. 3 points support the notion of latency in Lyme borreliosis. So there's three, what they call 3 points or 3 indicators for this kind of latent stage of Lyme. So the first is the history of the patient with certain third stage manifestations, such as really, really advanced arthritis, swelling of the joints, ACA. That's several years elapse without symptoms between manifestation of the early and then the late phase of the disease. So what happens is you may get bit, you get an erythema migrans, right? And then you get a little flu-like symptoms. You get your doxy, and you're symptom-free. And then all of a sudden you start getting arthritis in your joints, right? So that's like the first phase. The second phase can be isolated into 2 types of patients who lack typical signs and symptoms in the beginning of the phase. Like they didn't get an erythema migrans, was the rash, the bullseye rash, all right? And material for laboratory investigation was taken. And 1, long-standing rashes completely disappear, and the site of the material, the biopsy material where they took, where the tick bit, right? And they took material, had elevated IgG, okay? And then the second cases involve multiple tick bites, elevated serum IgG, antibody titer, and normal cerebrospinal fluid, but they could isolate the Borrelia in the cerebrospinal fluid. It's just that the fluid is not in a state of illness, if you will. So they're there, but they're not causing symptomology yet. And then, of course, the third epidemiological studies have shown that some forest workers have elevated antibody titers against Borrelias, usually, again, of the IgG, immunoglobulin G type, apparently lacking symptoms, okay? So there's this absolute understanding by researchers of Lyme borreliosis that pretty much say, oh yeah, you can have this and it can be diffused through your body. It can be in your joints, it could be in your cerebrospinal fluid, it could be everywhere, and you could have no symptoms at all. You could have had a rash and then it went away, or you could have not had a rash. So that's really important. And this book was published in 1995. So it's not as if people who study the disease, Lyme disease or Lyme borreliosis, don't know that this exists. It's just that it hasn't really become a daily conversation in wellness, health, and medicine per se. So that's one of the first things I wanted to share about that. And then the other thing, this is an area, and this is on page 99 in the book, the natural course of the disease in the U.S. and Europe. The natural course of Lyme is difficult to assess. In the United States, 55 untreated patients with the rash, the bullseye rash, erythema migrans, have been followed for many years afterwards. Of these patients, 80% developed arthritis years later. 62% in the joint, periarticular or musculoskeletal pain. So musculoskeletal pain, such as fibromyalgia, 18%. So a lot of people who have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia may actually have an underlying Lyme issue. 9 experienced recurrent rashes. They just keep getting rashes and they won't go away. And Tom, you've had that experience, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
8% develop neurological conditions. 4% cardiac abnormalities, so the heartbeat changes or they have really weird arrhythmias, and a total of 20% didn't develop any consecutive signs and symptoms at all. 20% of these, like this group of patients that they watched literally for decades. Recently estimated, however, that the occurrence of frank neurological involvement was anywhere between 15 to 20%. So 15 to 20% of all frank neurological diseases may actually be Lyme disease, which exactly what Art Gertler was saying. Dr. Gertler was saying that there's a high percentage and everyone should be screened for Lyme. If you have arthritis, if you have ongoing strange neurological signs, you absolutely should be screened for Lyme disease. And of course, for me, and the cardiac involvement, my mom, she used to garden all the time outside, in Ashland, Massachusetts. And she would get ticks. She would just pull them off. She didn't even think about it. And then years later, her heart started to fail. And now she wears a pacemaker. So it's a very real thing. And I really want people to understand that the original researchers who delved into Lyme and Lyme borreliosis know that it can sustain itself in the body for very, very, very long periods of time, decades before you can have symptoms. So if you have strange symptoms and if you're not well and you've been chronically ill and you're trying to figure it out, please make sure you go see someone who's Lyme literate, who will do a proper Lyme screening, which would be a test, an IgG test, not just a Western blot. That's really, really important to understand, is that you're not just doing a Western blot test. That's the standard of care in the US, but that you go further, see someone who's literate in Lyme, and get the right kind of testing to find out if you have an underlying Lyme, chronic, long-term Lyme disease issue.
This is one of those hidden diseases, if you'd like to, if you want to use that term. So many people have it and don't know that they have it.
Exactly.
Or so many people get it and then they get some symptoms, and then the symptoms go, as Nan was saying, the symptoms go away. They figure, okay, I'm done with it, I'm fine.
Right.
And 10 or 15, 20 years later, those symptoms come back. So this is kind of what's going on with me when Nan mentioned that I have a rash. It's like out of the blue, for no other reason, there's some sort of a rash going on that just won't go away. And I was bitten by a tick way back, probably at least 30 years ago now, in upstate Vermont.
Dr. Gertler was saying, what are the things that have been researched and what are the things that really some people are doing just to help others, to help people who are chronically ill that have, Western medicine has not been able to give us an answer, and they haven't been able to give us a vaccine either that works. As you heard Dr. Gertler say, it's really a problem, because wouldn't that be great if we could get a vaccine that works so that we can go out and enjoy and not have to think about outside, dig in the garden, go for a walk in the woods, go for a walk in the prairies. But we can't. We have to think about this, because you don't always know when you've been bitten. You really don't. Not everyone mounts a rash or a bullseye rash. They don't. And not everyone knows the ticks are really, really small. And in the spring, they're so small, sometimes you can't see them. So they can get under your armpits and your crotch and the nape of your neck, hanging off your earlobe. I found them. One time I found one just hanging off my earlobe, and so, I treated it, of course, and watched. You have to watch and wait. You have to watch for about a month. It takes a long time. I'm going to start with stevia leaf. Stevia, I love stevia for a lot of reasons. Stevia is a plant belonging to the chrysanthemum family. It's native to Paraguay, where the native Guarani Indians have used it for over 1,500 years as a sweetener, as a digestive aid, a tonic, and a topical aid in wound healing. And like many other herbs from South America, stevia was introduced to Europe in the 16th century. by Spanish conquistadores who returned to Spain. In the late 1880s, Moises Bertoni, director of the College of Agriculture in Paraguay, began to study the stevia plant. In 1905, Bertoni published an article about the incredible sweetening power of stevia. The first crop of stevia was harvested in 1908. Subsequently, stevia plantations began cultivating the herb all over South America. And it's everywhere now, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. Stevia has been, it's kind of like the darling of the natural products industry, especially for drinks and things that would normally be sweetened with sugar.
Right.
And it does have, what's interesting about stevia that you really need to know is that there are obviously different grades of stevia. Really good stevia doesn't have that sort of bitter aftertaste that a lot of people complain about with the use of stevia.
Right.
And it's something that has been, people try to grow it in other parts of the world, but the really premium stevia is coming from Paraguay, where it, was endemic, or indigenous rather, excuse me. And it was also, I've heard that it can actually be grown here in the United States if it's done properly.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. I mean, I know in Japan, in the 1970s, the Japanese really embraced stevia. They will not use high fructose corn syrup to sweeten anything in Japan. They use stevia. That's basically their go-to sweetener in Japan and Korea. I love the plant. Now, lots of times when people buy stevia, they, like you said, that there's that bitter aftertaste, but that's because it's been super refined. Stevia is a green plant, and I get my stevia from Jane in Wisconsin. It's just a beautiful farm in Wisconsin, 5 Elements, and if any of you want to check her out, it is the most delicious tasting extract of stevia I've ever had, and she does whole leaf. So, but stevia actually is processed to focus on this compound called steviosides, and that's composed of glucose, sucrose, and steviol. So 2 different kinds of monosaccharides and an alcohol. And a second compound called ribaldoside also contributes to stevia sweetness. So it's heat and acid stable. It's 100 times sweeter than sucrose at a 10% sucrose concentration, and has 0 calories. But it does a lot of other things. And we're going to focus on sweeteners in our next episode. But I wanted to talk about the whole leaf stevia because it is a time-tested vulnerary. A vulnerary is a wound healer. And it's very antimicrobial when you use the whole leaf. So it's now there's been some university research on whole leaf stevia regarding Borrelia burgdorferi. Stevia apparently is a biofilm busting herb. Now, biofilm is basically when a bacteria or a fungus, like a yeast, gets in your body and becomes resistant. They kind of make colonies that are linked together, and that kind of spread out through your digestive tract and other places, like your joints or your cerebrospinal fluid or what have you. So biofilms, we like to bust biofilms. And stevia whole leaf has that ability. So I'm going to share a little research, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about another biofilm busting herb. So I just want to share this European Journal of Microbiology and Immunology, published in 2015. The title says Effectiveness of Stevia Whole Leaf Extract Against the Various Morphological Forms of Borrelia burgdorferi. And this is an in vitro study, and since then universities have moved on into human studies with whole leaf stevia. But the University of New Haven and West Haven, Connecticut, and their Department of Biology and Environmental Sciences did the original in vitro science. And basically what they say is Lyme disease is tick-borne, multisystemic disease caused from Borrelia burgdorferi. Administering antibiotics is the primary treatment for this disease. However, relapse often occurs when antibiotic treatment is discontinued. The reason for relapse remains unknown, but recent studies suggest that the possibilities of the presence of antibiotic-resistant Borrelia persist as biofilms in the body. And one of the most interesting conclusions of this early research was Stevia significantly reduced Borrelia burgdorferi forms. It resulted from this particular study, as suggested, a natural product such as whole Stevia leaf could be considered as an effective agent against Borrelia burgdorferi. So it is being studied as a natural kind of ongoing safe, ongoing biofilm buster that might help people who have that relapsing, or as Dr. Gertler called it, a flare. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's me for today. Talky today. Tom, you're going to share another biofilm buster herb. So.
Right. Yeah, I'll do a very quick review of another one of my really favorite Ayurvedic herbs. Now, as you might guess, that with the name like an herbal storyteller, I've been interested in herbs from all different ethnobotanical traditions. And Ayurveda is one of those traditions that's always fascinated me. It has such an amazing materia medica, or list of plants that it uses in so many different ways. So Azadirachta indica is another name, that's the official name, for what's called the neem tree. Now, you may remember when we had our interview with Autumn Blum from the Stream to Sea product, one of the things that Autumn was really foundational in was bringing the use of neem into this country. She had 2 different neem lines that she developed, and you might remember we talked about her showing up at shows with this little neem line that nobody had ever heard of what neem was, and it went on to become very, very big. She used it to heal her dog, who had a terrible fungal infection on its skin and was losing all its hair. Well, it looked like it almost was ready to be put down. And she used neem on the dog every day. And its skin healed and its hair grew back. In fact, that's what a lot of times people in India can use it for, that because it's very antifungal. So it really works on the scalp and on the skin to help heal the skin. It can be used on wounds to help your wound heal without terrible scarring. And it actually helps the wound to heal very quickly. There have been studies done on people with skin ulcers, with complete resolution of the skin ulcers using the neem. Now, what's interesting is in Sanskrit, the name for neem is arista, and that means that it's perfect, that it's imperishable, and that it's complete. So they use the entire tree, all the parts of the tree, the flowers, the bark, the roots, the whole tree as different medicinal products. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is that because of its connotation with health, it's very rare to go into an Indian neighborhood anywhere in India and not see a neem tree planted, because it was often considered to be the neighborhood pharmacy or the village pharmacy. And that's how revered this tree was, is that, we've got to have this tree because we're going to need the medicine that this tree can provide us. Now, to segue into what Nan was talking about, one of the big things about biofilms that people don't know is that biofilms are one of the major causes of tooth decay. It's a biofilm that develops in the mouth that protects those bacteria that are causing the tooth decay from our body's immune system and from just natural, like toothbrushing and so on. And there are compounds in neem that have been found to break that biofilm down and allow for much better oral hygiene, even better than using some of the really strong, like prescription-only medical mouthwashes that you can get. There was a study done in 2017 for people who had type 2 diabetes, because with type 2 diabetes, they tend to have more of an incidence of this biofilm and tooth decay. And literally, after just a very short period of time, about a month, people who were using neem, actually, traditionally it's used as a twig, and you brush your teeth with the twig. Now you can get it in toothpaste form. the biofilms had been dissolved and their tooth decay was starting to disappear, and their mouth health, their periodontal health was much improved. Now, they've gone on from that to start to experiment with that in the human digestive tract because there are so many instances of biofilms that are occurring in the human digestive tract. Now, keep in mind, neem is one of those herbs that is not real
It's
studied.
stinky.
Well, okay, I was going to get to that. I was going to downplay that, but neem actually is, it's got almost like a garlic smell to it. So it's not exactly the herb of choice when you want to go out and have a wonderful social evening with people, but it's extremely effective. And it hasn't got a lot of research to it, but there's so many different things. It's for head lice, for children with head lice. It's absolutely amazing. Literally, you use a neem shampoo, leave it on for 10 minutes, and it kills all the lice without being harsh or anything to the child's skin. It's wonderful for wound healing and so on. So for my pick this this show, neem is one of my favorite things. I just have to sequester myself if I'm really using it on something, so that people don't look at me like, "What have you been eating?" But it's an amazing herb that really deserves a lot more attention, a lot more use. And I'll give you some of the other real quickly,
Yes,
just some of the other
please.
things it can be used
Yeah.
for. It is used as a male contraceptive
Mhm.
and very effectively because it kills the sperm and keeps it from impregnating the woman. But when you stop using it, it actually you return back to normal. This is what's been traditionally used in India for hundreds of years. Clinical studies don't show that that's necessarily true because they haven't gotten those kind of results. But they do know that with animal studies, it's absolutely true that it's like a reversible contraceptive for men, and it can also be a contraceptive for women with being very, very natural. They've done uterine implants where they've shown that it works. Now, another one is the fact that
You have to take quite a bit of it for it to work as a contraceptive, and that's probably where the problem is they're not taking enough. It's
well,
it's a
yeah,
stinky
you have to be
herb.
careful though
Yeah.
because you have to be careful because you don't it's a very
It's very
strong plant.
strong. Yeah.
So you don't want to take too much, especially you don't want to take if you're trying to use the oil as opposed to the little
Whew.
capsules. Little capsules will give you maybe 30
Right.
milligrams per serving,
Right.
and that's relatively safe. But you don't want to be taking large
You know,
amounts, like
yeah, that'll be insane.
not at all,
Yeah.
not at all.
Work with
So
a
we're
work with a skilled practitioner on this one. Yeah,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly. And if you have type 2 diabetes or if you're diabetic, you definitely want to because it does have an effect on blood sugar. That was
Right.
one of the other things that it's been found to be very effective at. So I'm going to leave it at that because there's otherwise we could go on for
The
hours
hair
here. It's
growth,
an amazing.
yeah, the skin
Yep.
renewal, it's incredible for that if you can
Mhm.
stand the smell of it, just like you said. And yeah, it's remarkable. It's definitely part of my
And
practice. I love it.
well, one of the other things, real quickly, is I used to go down to Costa Rica all the time to go surfing. And there was a little tiny hotel that was right on the beach, but it was also right next to a little stream outlet. And there were always mosquitoes, and people were being eaten, practically carried away by the mosquitoes. There were so many mosquitoes. And I had a neem-based insect repellent that literally I could sit there on the patio of the little hotel with absolutely no mosquitoes anywhere near me, and everybody else was swatting like crazy. So in India, as a matter of fact, what they do is they'll take pieces of cotton and soak it in neem oil and put it in their windows to keep because the mosquitoes are just even repelled by the smell.
It is a
So there you
remarkable
have it.
plant.
That's my
No, thank you for
my favorite
It
thing.
is definitely stevia, whole leaf stevia, my favorite thing for today, and Tom's favorite thing is neem oil, neem plant, the whole plant. So, well, our time is almost up, but we do have a request, and our first request is if you wouldn't mind, please, if you like what you heard today, like our Facebook page, share our podcast with friends and family who are really interested. Let us know if there's something you want to hear us talk about. Please, give us a heads up on that Facebook page. I check it, not every day, but I check it. enough to really get a sense if people are giving us feedback. We've had a couple of people give us feedback, and it was really great to see that. Thank you so much.
Don't be afraid to please repost this
Yes.
on other sites.
Yes.
If you want to take it out to Instagram or out to LinkedIn or places like that, please repost it as many times as you want.
Yeah, definitely. So
we love that.
And with that, we'll say, we'll probably say our goodbyes for today. So.
Well, I always have my last little tidbit of news. It's funny. I like to call it a funny thing that happened on the way to health. That's my opinion. But did you hear about the man who told his doctor that he absolutely, positively couldn't handle the idea of brain surgery?
No.
No, well, it's true, but the doctor changed his mind.
You're a nut, Tom. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope this was a helpful podcast. And we will see you again very soon.
Be aware of those ticks out there, folks. Check for them.
Yes, please do. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Okay, everyone. Until next time, I'm Nan.
And I'm Tom.
And we'll have more great topics and guests in the very near future. So join us right here in 2 weeks as the Supplement Super Sleuth
and the Herbal Storyteller take another deep dive into the fascinating world of the natural products industry.
See you later.